"Please, that hurts," the rancher checks, and he does the unthinkable. The sun was slowly dropping behind the wide hills, turning the sky into soft shades of orange and pale gold. The ranch stretched far beyond what the eye could easily measure. Long wooden fences divided the land into open sections where cattle grazed lazily. The air smelled of dry grass and dust, mixed with the faint scent of hay from the barn nearby. It was quiet in a way that only the countryside can be quiet, not empty, but calm and steady. Daniel Harper walked along the fence line with slow, firm steps. His boots pressed into the dry ground, leaving clear marks behind him. He had followed this same path almost every day for years. He knew every corner of this land. He knew which fence posts leaned slightly to the side, which gates creaked louder than the others, and which parts of the field collected water after heavy rain. To most people in town, Daniel was known as a serious man. He did not smile often. He spoke only when necessary. His voice was deep and steady, and he rarely showed strong emotion. He believed that running a ranch required discipline, structure, and clear rules. Animals needed direction. Workers needed guidance. Feelings, in his opinion, only made things complicated. He adjusted the brim of his hat as the wind picked up gently. The cattle were spread out across the pasture, heads down, chewing slowly. Everything looked normal. That was how Daniel liked it, predictable and under control. He paused near the far side of the property, where the fence ran close to a narrow line of trees. This area was quieter than the rest of the ranch. Fewer workers came this far unless repairs were needed. Daniel preferred to check it himself. As he stood there scanning the herd with careful eyes, he heard something. It was faint at first, so faint that he thought it might have been the wind moving through the grass. He remained still, listening. There it was again, a soft, strained sound. Daniel frowned slightly. Cattle often made noise, low calls to one another, small sounds when moving around. But this was different. It carried a sharp edge of distress. It was not loud, yet it did not belong to the usual rhythm of the ranch. He turned his head toward the trees. For a moment he considered ignoring it. Animals sometimes got startled or confused and then settled down on their own. That was the natural order of things. Interfering too quickly could cause more trouble than good. But the sound came again, longer this time. It was almost like a weak plea. Daniel felt a small tightening in his chest, though he could not explain why. He adjusted his gloves and began walking toward the source of the noise. His steps were steady but slightly faster than before. As he moved closer, he noticed movement near the fence. A small figure struggled awkwardly against the metal wires. One of the younger calves had wandered too close to a broken section of fencing. The metal strands were twisted in an unnatural way, likely damaged during the last storm. The calf's front leg was caught tightly between two sharp loops. The animal tried to pull away, but each movement only tightened the hold. Daniel stopped a few feet away and took in the situation carefully. The calf's breathing was quick. Its body trembled as it shifted its weight. The wide, dark eyes were full of confusion and fear. He sighed quietly. "Always finding trouble," he muttered under his breath. To him, this looked like a simple problem at first glance. Cut the wire, free the leg, move on. That was how things usually worked. Ranch life did not allow much time for hesitation. But when he stepped closer, he saw that the situation was worse than he expected. The wire had pressed deep into the calf's leg. The skin around it was already swollen. A thin line of red marked where the metal had rubbed harshly with each desperate movement. The calf shifted again and a soft cry escaped from its throat. Daniel froze. The sound was not loud. It was small, almost fragile, yet it carried something that made him pause. It was not anger or frustration. It was fear. The wind blew across the open field, lifting small clouds of dust. The rest of the herd remained calm in the distance, unaware of the struggle happening at the fence line. Daniel took another step forward and crouched slightly to examine the wire. The calf immediately jerked its leg, trying to escape his presence. Its breathing grew faster. "Easy," Daniel said firmly. He reached out carefully, but the moment his glove touched the wire, the calf let out another strained cry. It sounded almost like a quiet voice saying, "Please, that hurts." Daniel pulled his hand back. He stared at the animal longer than he meant to. He had handled injured livestock before. On a ranch, such incidents were not unusual. Animals wandered, fences weakened, weather caused damage. Most of the time, he handled problems quickly and without hesitation. Efficiency was important. The ranch depended on it. Yet something about this moment felt different. Perhaps it was the way the calf's legs trembled, not just from pain but from fear. Or perhaps it was the way the animal stopped moving for a second and simply looked at him, not with anger, not with blame, but with confusion. Daniel shifted his weight and looked down at the wire again. If he pulled too quickly, it would cause more damage. If he delayed too long, the swelling would worsen. He felt a strange discomfort inside him, not physical but emotional. It was an unfamiliar feeling. He was used to solving problems with clear steps. This felt slower, heavier. The ranch around him seemed quieter than usual. Even the wind felt softer. For a brief second, a memory flashed in his mind. He saw himself as a young boy standing beside his father near this very fence line. Back then, the posts were newer, the paint less faded. His father had shown him how to repair loose wires, how to check for weak spots. "Land and animals depend on you," his father had once said. "They don't have words, you have to pay attention." Daniel had not thought about that sentence in years. He shook the memory away and focused on the present. The calf attempted to pull its leg again, and the wire tightened slightly. A sharp sound escaped its mouth. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He stood up straight for a moment, scanning the area. There were no workers nearby. The barn was a short distance away, but calling someone would take time. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, thinking. The easy option would be to cut the section quickly and let the calf limp away. Nature would handle the rest. That was often how ranch life worked. Survival, strength, endurance. But as he looked down at the trembling animal, he realized this was not just about speed. The calf's body was shaking now from exhaustion. Its earlier struggles had drained its energy. Daniel slowly knelt down again. This time he did not rush. He studied the way the wire wrapped around the leg. It had twisted in layers. Simply yanking it free would cause unnecessary harm. It would need to be loosened carefully. He took a slow breath. The calf watched him closely. For the first time in a long while, Daniel noticed how small the animal really was. Its coat was still soft, lighter in color than the older cattle. It had probably been born only a few months ago. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the grass. Daniel reached toward the fence post and held it steady. The wood was rough under his glove. He tested the tension of the wire gently. The calf flinched again. "Stay still," he said, but his voice was quieter now. The rancher who believed emotions had no place in work suddenly found himself feeling something he had not expected, responsibility beyond routine. The cry he had heard earlier echoed faintly in his mind. "Please, that hurts." He knew animals did not speak in human words, but the meaning was clear enough. The moment stretched in silence. Daniel removed one glove slowly and placed it on the ground beside him. His bare hand touched the cool metal wire. It felt sharp and unyielding. The calf trembled again. Daniel looked into its eyes one more time, and something shifted inside him, not dramatic, not loud, but steady. This was no longer just another task on the ranch. This was a choice, and the sun continued to sink behind the hills as he prepared to make it. Daniel stayed kneeling beside the calf, the fading sunlight stretching long shadows across the field. The air felt cooler now, and the quiet around him seemed heavier than before. He could hear the distant sound of other cattle moving slowly through the grass, but near the broken fence, everything felt still. The calf's leg was trapped tightly between twisted strands of metal wire. Every small movement made the wire press deeper. Its breathing came in short, uneven bursts. Its body shook, not only from pain but from fear. Daniel looked at his bare hand resting against the fence post. The metal felt cold and rough under his fingers. He had removed his glove without thinking much about it, but now he understood why. He needed to feel the tension of the wire directly. He needed to know how tightly it had wrapped around the young animal's leg. He reached forward slowly. The moment his fingers touched the twisted metal, the calf jerked and let out another soft cry. It wasn't loud, but it carried a pleading tone that made Daniel's chest tighten again. "Easy," he said, but this time his voice was not firm or commanding. It was softer, steadier. The calf's wide eyes fixed on him. For a second it stopped struggling. It was as if it sensed that this man was not here to cause more harm. Daniel carefully examined how the wire had twisted. It wasn't just one loop. It had wrapped around itself several times, likely when the calf had panicked and tried to pull away. The more it had struggled, the worse the trap had become. He shook his head slightly. If he pulled hard and fast, he might free the leg quickly. But that would leave deeper injury. He knew that. He had seen it happen before with other animals on other days. The easier choice would be to cut the entire section of fencing and step back. Let the calf walk off. Let nature take its course. Ranch life was full of hard realities. Not every problem received careful attention. But as he looked at the trembling body in front of him, he felt something inside him resisting that old way of thinking. The wind moved through the tall grass again, brushing gently against his back. The sky above had begun turning a deeper shade of orange. He didn't have much daylight left. He adjusted his position and sat lower in the dirt, bringing himself closer to the calf's level. The ground was dry and rough beneath him, but he ignored it. "Stay still," he whispered. Slowly, very slowly, he began untwisting the outer layer of wire. He didn't pull. Instead, he rotated it carefully in the opposite direction, trying to loosen the tight coils without causing more pressure. The calf flinched again, but this time it did not jerk violently. It seemed tired now. Its earlier panic had drained its energy. It only trembled slightly, watching his hands move. Daniel felt the sharp edge of the wire scrape lightly against his skin. A thin line appeared across his knuckle, but he didn't pay attention to it. His focus remained on the trapped leg. He paused after each small movement, giving the calf time to settle. The quiet stretched on. As he worked, his thoughts began to wander in ways he did not expect. He remembered being young and standing beside his father in this same field. Back then, he had been impatient. He had wanted to fix everything quickly. He had believed speed meant strength. But his father had once stopped him during a similar situation. A sheep had gotten tangled in a loose rope near the barn. Daniel had tried to pull it free in one quick motion. His father had placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Slow down. When something is hurting, rushing makes it worse." Daniel had rolled his eyes at the time. He had thought those words were too gentle for ranch life. Now, kneeling in the dirt decades later, those words echoed clearly in his mind. He swallowed hard. The wire loosened slightly under his careful movements. One loop slipped away from the calf's leg. The animal let out a small breath, as if feeling a bit of relief. "That's it," Daniel murmured. He could feel his heartbeat steadying as he worked. The earlier tension in his chest was slowly being replaced by focus and something else, something warmer. He continued rotating the wire strand by strand. Each twist required patience. Each shift had to be measured. If he moved too quickly, the calf would panic again. The sun dipped lower and the light grew softer. The field seemed almost golden now. Dust particles floated gently in the air around them. Another worker's truck could be seen far in the distance, but no one had noticed what was happening at the far fence. This moment belonged only to Daniel and the calf. After several long minutes, he managed to loosen a second layer of twisted wire. The pressure around the leg reduced slightly. He could now see more clearly where the metal had pressed into the skin. He felt a wave of concern. The leg was swollen and the area looked sensitive. If he handled it carelessly, the damage could grow worse. The calf shifted again, but instead of pulling violently, it only made a weak attempt to move. Its strength was fading. Daniel reached out gently and placed his hand against the calf's shoulder to steady it. "Almost there," he said quietly. He was surprised by the softness in his own voice. He had not spoken like that in years, not to animals, not even to people. Another strand loosened. He paused and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm. The evening air was cooler now, but his concentration had made him warm. His knees ached from kneeling on the hard ground, yet he did not stand up. Instead, he leaned closer. The final tight coil remained. This one had wrapped the deepest. It would require extra care. Daniel took a slow breath and gently inserted his fingers between the wire and the calf's leg, creating the smallest bit of space. The calf tensed immediately. "Easy," he whispered again. He began rotating the last strand backward. It resisted at first. The metal scraped slightly against his skin. He adjusted his grip and tried again, slower this time. The wire shifted. The calf let out a sharp but brief cry. Daniel froze, holding the position steady until the animal calmed. He waited. The wind blew softly across the open land, carrying the scent of dry grass and evening air. When the calf's breathing slowed again, he resumed. Millimeter by millimeter, the coil began to open. Finally, with one careful motion, the last loop loosened enough for him to gently lift it away. The wire fell aside against the fence post with a faint metallic sound. For a second, neither of them moved. The calf's leg was free. It tried to stand properly but stumbled slightly, weak from the struggle. Daniel quickly supported its body to prevent it from falling hard onto the ground. "Slow," he said calmly. The calf lowered itself carefully into the grass, breathing heavily but no longer trapped. Daniel sat back on his heels, staring at the freed leg. It would need cleaning and care. Leaving it like this would not be wise. He knew infections could develop if wounds were ignored. He glanced toward the barn in the distance. Carrying the calf that far would not be easy. It wasn't small anymore, and the walk back would take effort. He could call for help. He could leave it here and check on it later. He could choose the quicker path. But as he looked at the animal resting in the grass, something inside him had already changed. The real decision had not been about removing the wire. It was about what kind of man he wanted to be when no one else was watching. The field was nearly silent now, the sun almost gone. The sky held only thin streaks of fading light. Daniel slowly stood up, brushing dirt from his jeans. He placed both hands on his hips and looked down at the calf. It lifted its head slightly, watching him. There was no fear in its eyes now, only exhaustion and a quiet trust. Daniel let out a long breath. He knew this moment would not be spoken about in town. No one would praise him, no one might even notice. But he noticed, and that was enough. He bent down again, sliding his arms carefully beneath the calf's body, preparing to lift it. The choice had been made. Daniel lifted the calf slowly, feeling the weight press against his arms and shoulders. It was heavier than he expected, but he did not let it show. The animal's body trembled slightly in his hold, exhausted from the struggle and the pain of its injured leg. Every careful movement was measured. He did not want to jolt or hurt it further. The calf leaned its head lightly against his chest, almost as if trusting him entirely. The walk toward the barn was long. The uneven ground made each step difficult. Daniel had to balance the calf carefully, making sure it did not slip or twist its leg. Dust rose gently around his boots with each step. He could hear the distant low calls of the other cattle, but near him, everything seemed quiet, almost sacred. Every sound of the calf's heavy breathing reminded him how fragile life could be. For a moment, he thought about placing it down in the open field and letting it rest there. It might recover on its own. Many ranchers would have chosen that path. It was easier, faster, and safer for the human. But Daniel could not. The calf had no protection here, and its leg needed care. He had made a promise with his actions. He would see this through. With every step, he felt his back aching, but he ignored it. The muscles strained, the sweat forming on his forehead, but he continued. The barn came into view at last, the familiar wooden structure with wide doors that opened into the warmth and smell of hay. It had always been a place of work, filled with animals, noise, and labor. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it was a place of care. Inside the barn, he lowered the calf gently onto a bed of fresh straw. Its legs rested unevenly, the injured one clearly weak. He knelt beside it, examining the leg carefully. The swelling had grown, and a small wound was already forming where the wire had pressed deeply. It would need cleaning and dressing, or the injury could become worse. He fetched a bucket of water and a clean cloth. As he began cleaning the wound, the calf flinched slightly at the touch. Daniel whispered soothing words, soft and gentle, a language the animal seemed to understand. He worked slowly, carefully dabbing the injured area, making sure not to cause more pain. He had never spent so much time in such close, careful contact with a single animal. Normally, his work was quick and efficient. Tonight, efficiency was irrelevant. Compassion was the priority. Once the wound was cleaned, he applied an antiseptic mixture and carefully wrapped the leg with clean bandages. He stepped back for a moment, looking at his work. The calf was lying calmly now, breathing steadily. For the first time in days, it looked safe. Daniel's hands were rough and calloused, streaked with dirt and a small line of blood from the wire scrape, but he did not notice. His focus was on the animal. For the next several days, he personally checked on the calf before sunrise and after sunset. He made sure it had fresh water and hay, and he ensured the area was clean and quiet so it could rest. He adjusted the bandages as needed and monitored the leg for any sign of infection. He even stopped other cattle from crowding near the injured animal, using gentle guidance rather than force. Daniel's workers began to notice. They had never seen him act this way before. Usually he gave instructions and left the work to them. But now he stayed in the barn, moving slowly, deliberately, watching over the calf like a guardian. Some whispered among themselves, surprised by the change. Daniel never acknowledged their comments. His attention was entirely on the calf. As he spent these hours, his own heart began to change. He realized how little attention he had given to individual animals in the past, how quickly he had solved problems without thought for the feelings or suffering of the creatures in his care. He remembered each time he had hurried a solution, believing it was enough. Now, as he watched the calf slowly grow stronger, he understood that true care required patience, attention, and time. The calf began to respond to his presence. It would look up when he entered the barn, recognizing the voice that had spoken softly, the hands that had lifted it from pain. Slowly, it began attempting small movements, testing its injured leg. Daniel would support it, letting it stretch and stand carefully. Every small improvement brought a quiet satisfaction, a sense of achievement far different from the satisfaction of finishing work efficiently. One afternoon, the sun streaming through the barn's slats made the straw glow golden. Daniel watched the calf as it took its first unassisted steps. Its legs wobbled, but it moved forward, gaining confidence. He did not cheer or call out. He simply observed, a quiet smile appearing on his face for the first time in a long while. He reflected on how often life required these unplanned acts of patience. In the past, he had focused only on results, not process. He had not allowed himself to slow down, to care deeply, to risk attachment. But now he had. The process of caring for the calf had changed him quietly but profoundly. The workers continued to watch. Some started to follow his example, helping where they could, speaking softly to the animals, paying closer attention to their needs. Daniel did not need to instruct them. His actions were enough to show them a different way. Even the other animals seemed to sense the change. They moved calmly around the barn, the usual restless energy replaced by quiet observation. It was as if the ranch itself had become aware that something new was happening, a respect for life that went beyond mere work. As days passed, the calf gained strength. Its leg healed slowly but surely. It began moving further and more confidently around the small enclosed area. Daniel stayed with it, supporting each step. Sometimes he would sit quietly nearby, letting the animal rest, observing the way it responded to gentle encouragement rather than force. Through this time, Daniel discovered more than just the healing of a single calf. He discovered patience he had not thought he possessed. He discovered the quiet strength in gentleness. He discovered that even a hard, disciplined life could be softened by deliberate care. And he discovered that the reward of this care was not recognition from others, but a quiet, personal understanding that he had done something right, something meaningful. The bond between man and animal grew. The calf began recognizing his presence instantly, approaching when he came near, trusting him completely. Daniel, in turn, began noticing other animals with a new awareness. He started checking more carefully for small injuries, offering attention to the quieter animals he had once overlooked. By the time the sun set each evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Daniel felt a sense of accomplishment far deeper than any other he had known. He had not just freed the calf from pain. He had chosen to care, to commit time, to act with intention. He had stepped beyond routine and efficiency, embracing a deeper responsibility for the life under his hands. The barn became a place of quiet vigilance and learning. Even when the calf was strong enough to move again in the open field, Daniel continued to observe, making sure every step it took was safe. His work had changed from mechanical labor to deliberate guardianship, a shift that he did not announce but that could be felt by everyone who watched him closely. And so, through patience, determination, and quiet attention, Daniel Harper discovered the power of care. The unthinkable act he had taken on that day, to stop, to focus, to personally guide a struggling calf, had changed him. Not dramatically at once, but slowly, subtly, in ways that would shape every action on the ranch from that day forward. The calf had survived. But Daniel had learned to thrive in a different way. And in the quiet of the barn, as the last light of day filtered through the slats, he realized that true strength was not in force or speed, but in commitment, patience, and the courage to act with heart. Daniel stood at the edge of the barnyard as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, painting the fields in soft gold and pink. The air was cool, carrying the earthy smell of wet soil and fresh grass from overnight dew. The world felt alive and quiet at the same time. The herd stirred slowly in the distance, heads lifting to nibble at new shoots of grass. The young calf, once weak and trembling, now moved steadily on its injured leg, testing the ground beneath it with careful steps. For weeks, Daniel had watched over the calf with unwavering attention. Each day he had made time to check the bandages, to ensure the wound was healing properly, to give it water and hay, and to protect it from the curious attention of the larger cattle. Every small improvement the calf made felt like a victory to him, a quiet affirmation that patience and care could work miracles. Now, as the calf walked a few paces away and turned its head to glance at him, Daniel felt a deep, unexpected satisfaction. It was not pride in the traditional sense, not about doing a job efficiently or being recognized for effort. It was a quiet contentment, a sense that he had done something meaningful. He had given his time, his attention, and his energy to something that could not thank him in words. Yet somehow the bond he felt in return was more powerful than any praise he had ever received. The calf walked further into the open pasture, gradually joining the rest of the herd. Its steps were careful, but stronger than they had been just a few days ago. The other animals seemed to acknowledge its presence, nudging it gently as it moved, and the calf adjusted confidently, no longer fearful. Daniel watched for a long moment, noticing how far it had come, both physically and in spirit. He remembered the first day he had found it, struggling and trapped, and he realized that the transformation had not been the calf's alone. His own transformation had been quiet but profound. Daniel had always considered himself practical, efficient, and strong, but in that efficiency, he had often overlooked the simple act of care. He had been the kind of man who solved problems quickly and moved on. He had thought that emotion was weakness. He had believed that compassion was secondary to work. But now, kneeling in the barn, tending to a struggling calf, he had discovered that patience, gentleness, and attention were not weaknesses at all. They were strengths. Over the following days, Daniel noticed subtle changes in how he approached his work. Tasks that had once felt mechanical and routine now held more meaning. He observed the smaller details he had previously ignored: a fence post leaning slightly, a bucket of water that needed cleaning, a horse that seemed uneasy. He attended to each one carefully, not for efficiency, but because he wanted to ensure everything was safe and comfortable. It was a different kind of responsibility, one that required thought, attention, and heart. His workers noticed as well. Some of them hesitated at first, unsure if they should speak or interfere. They had long been accustomed to Daniel's stern, distant approach. Yet now they saw him moving with patience, speaking softly, guiding without force. Slowly, quietly, they began to follow his example. A worker would gently encourage a calf to drink water or check a fence before it became a problem. They began noticing small injuries or signs of discomfort among the animals and acting to correct them, inspired not by orders, but by Daniel's example. The ranch itself seemed to breathe differently. Even the larger cattle moved with a subtle calm, sensing the quiet attention that had settled over the place. The routine of work continued, of course. The fences needed repair, the feed needed preparation, and the livestock needed tending. But the atmosphere was less hurried, less mechanical, more thoughtful. Life at the ranch had gained a sense of rhythm that was not just about work but about care. One afternoon, Daniel walked toward the far fence line, the same place where he had first heard the distressed cry. The sun was high, casting a bright glow over the pasture, and the wind stirred gently through the tall grass. The calf now stood a short distance away, alert and healthy, grazing alongside the others. It looked up at him, ears perked, and for a moment their eyes met. Daniel felt a wave of emotion, not loud, not dramatic, but deep and steady. He had helped this creature survive and thrive, and in doing so, he had learned something about himself. He remembered the words of his father, spoken decades ago on this same land. Strength isn't just about force, it's about responsibility. He had understood them in theory, but only now did he truly feel their meaning. Strength was not in dominating, controlling, or finishing tasks quickly. True strength was in patience, in care, in acting when it would be easier to look away. Daniel bent down to adjust a loose piece of wire along the fence. His hands moved methodically, carefully, as if each action mattered not only to the ranch, but to the creatures who depended on it. As he worked, he noticed small signs that he had previously overlooked: a patch of soft earth where rain collected, a branch pressing against a trough, a young calf testing its balance. He tended to each one not because it was urgent, but because it deserved attention. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel stood quietly in the barn, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The herd moved gently through the fields, the wind rustled the grass, and the quiet hum of the animals filled the air. He looked toward the sleeping calf, now curled on the straw, healthy and safe. He realized that what he had done was not just about saving a single animal. It was about choosing to act with kindness, even when no one else was watching, even when it was difficult, even when the easier choice was to walk away. In the weeks that followed, Daniel continued to watch over his ranch with this new awareness. He tended the animals with a thoughtful patience, speaking softly to them and observing their needs. He took care of his workers with a gentler hand, guiding them with example rather than strict commands. Life at the ranch continued to demand labor, effort, and long hours, but the work felt different now, deeper, more connected, more meaningful. The calf eventually rejoined the herd fully, moving confidently and playing with the other young animals. Daniel would watch it sometimes, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, thinking about the journey from fear and pain to trust and recovery. The transformation had been slow, but every moment mattered. One morning, as he walked along the fence line, Daniel paused and took in the wide fields, the rising sun, and the herd grazing quietly. The world felt full and steady, but he knew that his own life had shifted in ways he could not have anticipated. The small, unthinkable act, kneeling beside a trembling calf and committing himself to its care, had reshaped him. He had discovered that strength was not measured by force or toughness, but by patience, compassion, and the courage to act when it mattered most. The ranch continued its rhythm of work and life, but Daniel Harper had changed. He had learned that even the hardest of men could be softened by care, that even the strongest could act gently, and that sometimes the smallest acts, a steady hand, a quiet voice, a careful movement, could have the most profound impact. As the sun set over the fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Daniel stood quietly, watching his herd move across the pasture. He thought about the day it had all begun, when he had heard the soft cry and seen the struggling calf. He thought about the choices he had made, the patience he had found, and the bond he had formed. And in that quiet evening light, he understood clearly that the most remarkable strength he had discovered was not in what he could do to control the ranch, but in what he could do to care for life, for the animals, and for the small moments that truly mattered. The ranch continued, as it always had, with fences to repair, animals to feed, and fields to tend. But now it was not just a place of work. It was a place of life, of attention, of quiet compassion. And Daniel Harper, once a man of strict rules and efficiency, had become something more. A guardian, a careful observer. A man who understood that even the unthinkable act of care could transform not only those we help, but also ourselves. The wind whispered across the fields, the herd settled for the night, and Daniel stood tall, watching the open land. Somewhere in the quiet, he felt the presence of the young calf, safe and thriving, and he knew that the lesson he had learned, that the strongest thing one can do is to act with kindness, would stay with him forever.